Thank you everyone for joining us this morning for this important conversation. We have been receiving a ton of questions, as you can imagine, at Huntsman Mental Health Institute and the University of Utah, just about bullying, in particular, how it impacts young children, the impact of bullying short-term and long-term, and what parents can do to help their children, and what we all can do to be better supporters of kids who may be being bullied. So we wanted to bring some experts together this morning to have this conversation. So with us, we have Dr. Scott Langenecker. Dr. Langenecker is a clinical neuropsychologist and professor of psychiatry at Huntsman Mental Health Institute. We also have Rachel Lusinski, who is the business operations manager of our crisis community services at Huntsman Mental Health Institute, including our Utah Crisis Line and our Safe UT app. We also have Ann Kirby, who's assistant professor in the Department of Occupational Recreational Therapy. Dr. Kirby's done a lot of research on autism and suicide, so we're happy to have her expertise here this morning. And then we have also Dr. Jose Rodriguez, who is the Associate VP of Health, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So we are very pleased to have him with us today too. So before we get started, I think we'll just start with a couple of things that we'll talk through. And thank you. We put all of our experts' names and titles in the chat for you so you know who they are. And I'll give them each a second to just take a minute and talk about kind of their expertise in this area. We will start with Dr. Langenecker. So Dr. Langenecker, tell us a little bit about your work and how you work with families and kids who may be experiencing bullying.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to the panelists for joining as well. This is a very important topic. Bullying is an incredibly common and destructive process that happens throughout the lifespan. But it hurts the most when you're young and you don't necessarily understand why you're being bullied or what potential things you can do to manage it. And I work in treatment of depression, studying brain changes in depression, and I work primarily with teenagers and their families to understand causes and treatments for depression.
Thanks, Dr. Langenecker. Anne, why don't you tell us about some of your research around kids with autism and how bullying may impact or increase their risk for suicide?
Sure, thanks for having me. So I have conducted research related to autism and suicide, finding increased risk of suicide for people on the autism spectrum. Here in Utah, we saw about 1.5 times the risk for autistic people versus non-autistic people. So it's a really important topic. And I also am currently leading a National Institutes of Health study on this topic as well. And social factors, including bullying and just the way that autistic people are treated in society, definitely are a really important topic for us to be considering. And I think for a long time, there was assumptions that autistic people didn't perceive how other people were treating them because of stereotypes or assumptions about autism. And so I think we're learning more and more that that's not the case. And so how society is treating autistic people is really important, and bullying is something that we certainly see impact children on the spectrum. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kirby. Rachel, why don't you tell us about sort of the Safe UT app and through the crisis line, what you guys hear from some of the people who utilize those services, and how it can be a real resource for parents, teens, and educators.
Sure. Thank you everyone for the opportunity to be here today. I'm really grateful that there's conversations happening around this important issue and what can be done. Like Geraldine mentioned, Safe UT is our statewide crisis chat and tip smartphone application. So it can be downloaded at no cost on the Google Play Store or the App Store, and is available 24/7, 365, and is staffed by our team of master's level licensed independent mental health counselors. So these folks are expertly trained in how to support students, parents, and educators with mental health challenges, and see, unfortunately, a lot of chats and tips that get submitted through our app with concerns about bullying. So there are three main functions in the app. The first one is the two-way chat feature, where students can download the app and message real time back and forth with our master's level counselors. And that's where they typically talk about concerns with themselves and struggles that they're going through. There's also the feature where you can start a call and be connected into our Utah crisis line and speak on the phone with someone 24/7 if it's conversation they would rather process that way. And then there is our tip feature, where students are able to report concerns in a confidential way, typically about someone else that they're worried about, or about potential acts of violence, school threats, or bullying that they're seeing. Unfortunately, last year we saw that bullying was our second highest tip that was submitted through the app. So it is an issue that we really need more awareness around, more resources and support around. SafeUT is a great way for students, parents, and educators to access that and seek support. And we are expertly skilled at coordinating with school administrators on how to respond to those concerns that are reported, and sometimes law enforcement if the situation necessitates that. So I'm again really grateful for the opportunity to share this life-saving resource.
Dr. Rodriguez, I'll give you a minute too to talk about your work with diversity and why we wanted you to be a part of this panel today. Obviously, there have been conversations about race and how it impacts children who may be bullied as well. So maybe you can comment on that.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And I will comment on it. Bullying is a terrible problem, and it's worse for kids than it is for adults. There's no question about that. And having experienced it both as an adult and as a child, I understand how bullying can actually cause really significant obstacles moving forward for people. The other thing I would like to say is that my research has been in the area of health equity and racism in medicine. And I must say that unfortunately, racism is still very much a part of our daily lives. And those of us who are part of minoritized or racialized groups, we feel it every day. And when we're talking about bullying, I think sometimes there's a tendency to say, oh, well, bullying can happen to anybody. And that's 100% true. But if you're from a racialized background, it is very difficult to distinguish bullying from outright race-fueled bullying. And so this is something that we must remember, because a lot of times we won't be able to separate it out. And for people who are on the receiving end, it might be race or gender or LGBTQ status based. However, as victims, we might not want to accept that.
That's true. And I'm so glad you're a part of the conversation today. So thank you for sharing that. And I think I'm trying to see if we have some questions there. We do have a question. So hold on just a second. This question is actually for Dr. Langenecker. Can you tell us, we touched on it just a little bit, Dr. Rodriguez did, but tell us who typically gets bullied and why.
Yeah, I don't know that I could say it better than Dr. Rodriguez, or actually Dr. Kirby mentioned as well. There are many possible motivations for bullying. It could be from intentional, race-based bullying, to exclusionary bullying of LGBTQ youth, to also exclusionary bullying of kids who are on the spectrum. And Dr. Rodriguez made an important point. If you are from a, shall we say, minoritized or racialized group or excluded group, that can then become a part of your identity. And the bullying can become what we refer to as internalized. So it's not just an external force acting upon you, some of your own thoughts and self-talk can incorporate some of the bullying language and activities, and it can be incredibly destructive.
And do you want to comment on that too, and how it might impact, just say some more about how it might impact kids who have autism or other mental health issues?
Yeah, and I guess just tying together what Dr. Langenecker and Rodriguez both said, I guess for me, I think it's really important to consider intersectionality. So autistic youth are at increased risk of suicide. Our research that we've done here in Utah found that autistic women and girls in particular were at increased risk compared to non-autistic women and girls. And so autistic females are often considered a sort of minority group within the autism community. And then on top of that, you know, race and LGBTQ status and these other things can all kind of intersect. And so again, just thinking about that intersectionality and the way that all of those things can compound. And I'd also love to mention there's a lot of discussion and early research on something called autistic burnout. And that is kind of the weight of all of these different factors that can weigh on autistic people. So that can include how people are treating them, including bullying, including exclusion, including experiencing stigma, trying to work really hard to try to fit in. And all of that can lead to something called autistic burnout. That's a term coined by autistic people themselves about this idea that it's exhausting to be autistic in society and really feel the weight of that. And so just kind of thinking about all these factors together, I think is really important.
Rachel or Dr. Rodriguez, did you guys want to add anything to that?
Rachel?
You go first. You were faster to unmute.
I appreciate Dr. Kirby's words. You know, when she was talking about autistic burnout, it reminds me of some research that's been done here at the University of Utah on what is now called racial battle fatigue, which is a similar phenomena, which comes from, it's the exhaustion of you know, being part of a racialized minority. Specifically was coined by Dr. William Smith, who works at the U, and it causes serious problems. I mean, we're not just talking about the internalization of this process. We're also talking about things like depression and anxiety and fear prohibiting progress. And so these are real issues that Dr. Kirby has illustrated affect autistic people and also affect people from racialized minority groups.
Rachel, did you want to add anything else?
I think our other speakers have really covered it well. Just recognize that our clinicians that work on Safe UT, while I don't have all of the data, they anecdotally are sharing that they have seen increased rates of reported discrimination, whether it's based on abilities or race, and that it is a serious challenge that it doesn't just affect youth in high school. It's something that's being seen in elementary schools and middle schools, in high schools and higher education institutions. So I think really having these conversations, not just about how it can affect students and really unfortunately increase the risk for suicide, but how do we have these conversations at home and schools and make students aware of how to treat people with respect, with kindness, and how to report these concerns and handle them in a safe way with a trusted adult if this is something that they're experiencing.
Rachel, we have a question in the chat that I'm going to send to you. Do you see through some of the data with CFUT that bullying has gotten worse over time? Is it accelerating? Do we feel like school programs are working or making progress?
That's a great question. Looking at our historical data with SafeUT over the last few years, it typically accounts for about 9 to 11% of the total tips that are submitted through the app. So in the 2019 school year, we've looked at August, September, and October, the first 3 months of the school year. In 2019, before the pandemic, we saw 387 bullying tips that were reported. In 2020, comparing those same first 3 months of the school year, we had 144 bullying tips that were reported. We recognized that there was a decrease across the board in our tips being submitted because schools had moved to a more virtual or fully remote setting. And so we saw students generally using the app less because they were in their homes and there was less conversations about it in the school settings. This year, with students being back in person, we've received 209 bullying tips. So not as many as we saw in 2019, but the proportions of it still being 10% of total tips that are submitted remains. So it's more incidences than were reported last year, and the trends are holding steady or gradually increasing every year. Some of that comes with students being more aware of the app and that they can use this as a resource. And it certainly is correlated with some of the potential increases that we're seeing in general. We work very closely with our schools on providing these reports and providing this feedback, and have seen a lot of efforts on not just spreading awareness about SafeUT, but partnering with Hope Squads, incorporating parent groups, gathering feedback from educators and administrators to have more policies and protocols around how to handle bullying. So I think it's really critical that we continue these conversations and look for systemic approaches and solutions. And how do we handle this in a safe way? How do we validate these students that are reporting these concerns and protect them in a school setting? And how do we also get support for students that are doing the bullying? I would be curious to hear maybe from some of our other expert panelists on some of those reasons that students might bully and what those conversations with adults should look like as well.
Thanks, Rachel. And actually, we do have a question about that. So maybe Dr. Langenecker, this is a good one for you. Maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the reasons for bullying. If what kinds of things may drive a child to bully another child or an adult to bully another adult? And what are some of the strategies for working with people to stop the behavior? Or if you're a parent, how do you talk to your child about stopping bullying?
Yeah, there's a lot there. Let me just start out with the motivation. There can be a tremendous range of motivational factors for bullying. It could be boredom. It could be the fact that the individual themselves is actually from a marginalized or minoritized status and wants to achieve acceptance within a group by engaging in bullying. It could be that they have not learned some of the skills around feeling compassionate or caring for others, and so they're not tuned into how their behavior is actually affecting other people. The important thing to realize is that people who engage in bullying are often victims of bullying themselves, and it becomes a really complex pattern to actually dissect. And so from the perspective of a parent or from a school administrator or a teacher, it really is important to teach some of these skills around compassion, around caring for other people, around respecting other people, and creating a culture in which bullying is reported and is treated seriously. A lot of times it is not reported by youth, and a lot of times it is sort of not treated seriously. It's sort of swept under the rug and said, well, this is just what kids do. And that sends an incredibly disempowering message to the child who has mustered the courage to report bullying, and then to get the message that, well, we're not going to do anything about it, or we can't do anything about it. In terms of the strategies for how to manage this, some of the most effective programs that have come out have actually centered around parents and children. and teaching some of these basic skills for caring for other people and detecting when other people are in emotional distress, and teaching those skills early. They tend to have the most benefit for aggressive behaviors, and they tend to have the most benefit for boys. We still are learning how to manage some of the more subtle forms of bullying, which can include things like exclusion, not being invited to participate in a group, or being invited last, or even sometimes being invited but having some sort of negative comment made about you, your appearance, your race, your status, whatever it might be, before being invited.
There was a lot packed into that question, so thank you. Anne or Rachel or Dr. Rodriguez, do you guys want to comment on that at all? Tips for parents who may have a child who may be bullying others, or other reasons why children may be bullying other children.
I'll just kind of pull together what I think Rachel and Dr. Langenecker both said, that there's a systemic problem, and then there's also this kind of individual experience of it. And so it's really important to ask the question, because I think too often we talk about the victim of bullying and what they could or should do. And so it's so important to look at the bullier, and then also the system, and that's kind of allowing that to continue, and kind of the culture that might be occurring in a school or in a community or another setting where children are, and really kind of shifting the culture. I don't have advice for parents, but I hope someone else might.
Thank you, Dr. Kirby. I think it is important to think about who is the perpetrator and who's the victim. Having experienced this with my own children, it was difficult when my oldest son came to tell me that he was being bullied at the bus stop. So my first intervention was to go and stay at the bus stop with him. And my second intervention was to go and visit this child's parents. And, I don't remember how the story ended, to be honest with you. I know that the bullying went away, but I remember that I had to fight with my own son to talk to him about me talking to the other child's parents, because he didn't want me to. He thought it was going to make it worse. And my understanding of bullying, there's multiple motivations for bullying, but one of them is definitely fear. And so helping people to feel safe in their own skin is actually going to be something that will help us mitigate the amount of bullying that's going on. But it's still very, very scary. And I have a daughter who's 10 years old, and she told me about a child who was bullying her. And then by the time we were able to get to the school to talk to the teacher about it, the family had pulled that child out of school. And so, unfortunately, the problem didn't get dealt with. It was just switched away. And really what we need to do is deal with the problems to help heal. I mean, the antidote for bullying is love. So how do we help the perpetrators feel the love they need so they don't hurt others?
Dr. Langenecker, do you want to comment on, what can parents do to have good conversations with their children who may be being bullied, or how do you help your child if they are being bullied?
I think the main thing is to pay attention. I think a lot of children suffer in silence. And, Dr. Rodriguez happens to have children who are very comfortable communicating with him, but a lot of times kids don't say anything at all to their parents, and they suffer in silence. And that leads to that and growing internalization of bullying as something that they deserve. And once you start moving down that road, you will move to depression, you will move to anxiety, and you will move to having suicidal thoughts. As parents, Dr. Rodriguez reminded me, as parents, your most important role is actually to pay attention to your kids. And if your kids are being bullied or are bullying, you might be the last person to know. And so it's through other parents and through other kids that you might find out this information. As an action item, though, if you see something as a parent, say, your kid's friend bullying another child, and you have a relationship with that child's parents who's doing the bullying, that's where you can make the most difference, because you already have a relationship with them, and you could say, hey, I saw your son or daughter do this to this other child, and it was really painful to watch, and I know that it's tough to bring it up, but maybe you could have a talk with them. And a gentle confrontation with sort of that relationship at the back of it can really move the needle forward. It's we tend to think of these in terms of big and broad and serious concerns, and they are big and broad and serious, but at a very fundamental level, as Dr. Kirby mentioned, it's a social interaction and it's a social relationship. And so we as parents have to sort of help guide our children how to manage both sides of that interaction.
What should parents not do? That's a question we've had as well.
Well, I think the first thing, that parents might experience is shame. If their child is engaged in bullying, they might experience some shame, and that might lead to a really strong negative emotion, and they might feel that it's important to punish their child. There's a difference between punishing and disciplining. You actually want to provide the environment for your child to learn different behaviors. So there might be a negative consequence of the bullying, so that they take it seriously, what has transpired. But it's the educational part that comes with it that's the most crucial. And it turns out that maybe the discipline is less important than the educational bit, which is, I have faith in you as my child to behave in a better way. And maybe you made a mistake, and maybe you can make up for that mistake. And there's nothing more wonderful than to see a child who's engaged in bullying apologize for that behavior. As Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, it moves us towards this acknowledgement that we're all imperfect human beings and we're going to make mistakes, and we should own our mistakes and apologize for them and make amends.
Dr. Kirby or Rachel, did you guys want to comment on that at all? We do have a question. So when a child is being bullied, and we talked a little bit about what parents should do to engage in conversations with their children. What other steps can we take? Specifically, I think people are asking, should we go to this? Should we encourage them to fight back? Should we encourage them to go to the school? Do we go to, I think parents are like, what's the next step? So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that, but that was a question that has come up frequently.
I think it depends upon, as Dr. Rodriguez illustrated very nicely, it depends on how the conversation with your child unfolds. So there's a message that you want to send to your child that the bullying is not okay and they don't deserve to be bullied. That's the most important message. And then, it becomes a bit of a negotiation about what's going to happen after that. And, listening to your child's fears and concerns about how you manage it may in some ways unmotivate you to move forward, to do something about it. But I'd encourage you to continue to find a way within the concerns that your child has to actually, move forward towards some sort of healing or reconciliation process. I say this to myself all the time, and I'll say it to all of you. It's important to not underestimate what people will do when they become aware of a problem. And 9 times out of 10, the child's parents will probably do the right thing and help move towards reconciliation. And that's an important learning opportunity for both children.
I think in addition to that, we would certainly recommend not encouraging your child to fight back. Violence or bullying on top of bullying is certainly not the solution. But really practicing some important strategies and helping your child build those skills and the confidence to manage their emotions in the situation is something that is really helpful that parents can work on. So, it's okay to practice being assertive and saying, I don't like when you talk to me that way, or please leave me alone. Thinking about, who are your friends or your peers that you can walk to and from the bus with or spend time with at recess. There can certainly be strength in numbers. I think helping them even maybe understand that the bully may be hurt themselves or may have experienced some hard things. So how can we have some compassion for that, but also recognize this isn't okay and you don't have to tolerate this behavior. And enlisting the help of school administrators, of their classroom teacher or their guidance counselor, and making sure that principals and other leaders of the school are aware. We have heard that a lot of bullying occurs on playgrounds, bathrooms, and lunchrooms. And anytime that there's not supervision, there's a higher likelihood that those things could take place. So I think encouraging school administrators to network within their peer of academic leaders and finding out about other programs that have worked in their area, in their local communities, or even state and national best practices could be helpful, like peer mediation or conflict resolution or even anger management courses as a way to help reshape and reinforce more positive behavior in the classroom is something that's really critical. And then asking as a parent to be informed and involved if a school administrator is seeing something with your child, either as a victim or as a perpetrator. I think just those ongoing conversations, reinforcing and building those skills and letting your child know that you love them, you believe in them, and you want to be there to support them. Even if parents don't know exactly the right words to use, those are great steps to take. And additionally, remembering that SafeUT is a resource for parents to use as well. So our master's level clinicians are always available with skills, resources, and additional support.
And did you want to comment on how parents can help their children who may have autism or may have other disabilities or?
Yeah, and I think just building on what Rachel just said, all of this involving the school, involving adults feels really important. And to just bring back that word culture again, I think in some ways it does feel like there needs to be a culture of kindness, of anti-bullying, of anti-racism, anti-ableism. And so some of that might be hopefully trying to promote education. So in the case of children on the autism spectrum, children with other disabilities, children are learning from society, and we live in a society where disabled people experience an incredible amount of stigma, exclusion, limited access. And so, I hate that it feels like it has to be on parents, but parents can try to bring in opportunities for education and be involved in advocacy to teach adults in the community as well as children about disabilities and about neurodiversity and just kind of diversity of lived experience and communication and movement, and all these different ways that people live, and the disabled people are part of our community. Starting young to help children and adults better understand disability and kind of the benefits that having disabled people be an active part of the community can bring for the community.
Thanks, Dr. Kirby. We have time for a couple more questions. So we have one that came through the chat. What are the signs parents need to watch out for to see if their child is being bullied or bullying others? We touched on that a little bit, particularly kids who are really trying to hide it from parents or other adults. Dr. Langenecker, why don't you? kick us off with that one.
That's a super important question. It comes across in very subtle ways. If they have trouble falling asleep at night, that might be because they're worrying about the bullying. And you might not notice it because kids, might pretend like they're sleeping. So you might only notice it if they're having trouble getting up in the morning. If there's certain activities and situations that they give vague reasons for not wanting to go to, like I'm tired, I don't feel like it, it's important to understand what might be occurring in that environment that might make it unpleasant. I also wanted to take a minute just to sort of talk about in invisible minorities and what I would refer to as preemptive bullying avoidance. So a lot of our kids see some of the toxic culture that can come across in social media. And what I've observed is a lot of kids are actually not engaging actively in social media for fear of being bullied for illustrating their authentic self, whatever that authentic self might be. I work with lots of kids in the LGBTQ community, and many of them remain in the closet and have their status hidden from family and friends for fear of bullying that might occur. Well, that bullying is still occurring, it's just you don't know it. So people can make, insensitive comments or statements about, it being a lifestyle rather than a biological reality. And that can be incredibly hurtful. So people can be bullied without even anyone being aware of it even happening, in addition to sort of our more visible signs of minoritized or racialized bullying.
And I would love to just add that I haven't mentioned before, but not all autistic children, not all people on the autism spectrum communicate with speech. So a lot of what we had talked about earlier was, listen to your child, let them talk to you, have them tell the teacher. And so a lot of what Dr. Langenecker just mentioned of looking at some other non-speech, nonverbal behaviors can be really important for people on the spectrum and other people with disabilities who might not communicate with speech, to see things like, are they not sleeping well? Are there other kind of changes in behavior that you're seeing that could indicate some kind of distress? And so that's just another really important factor that's, I think, even more complicated for some people on the spectrum because of communication differences.
Dr. Kirby. Dr. Rodriguez, did you want to comment on that as well?
The only thing that I would add is that this is a tough situation, and we need to be sensitive to what children are experiencing. And I was lucky. My kids told me, but a lot of that has to do with, earlier investments in how we decided we were going to communicate. And so figuring that out is up to each individual family, however that's described or construed, to make sure that the communication lines remain open and that there's a safe place for them in their own homes.
Go ahead, Dr. Langenecker. I was just going to ask you to comment some more on that.
I was just reaffirming and nodding my head at what Dr. Rodriguez was saying. And I would just add that, this might feel a bit overwhelming to parents who are listening now. And I just want you to remind you that, kids are pretty resilient. And they can bounce back from such things, and bullying is pretty common. Like Dr. Rodriguez mentioned, build that relationship with your kids so that they know no matter what you're going to be supporting them. And one thing that many families do is they sort of have conversations over dinner or conversations over breakfast or on the way to piano practice or soccer practice, whatever it might be. One question you might want to just throw into your routine now again is there something kind of important that you've been wanting to tell me and there hasn't been an opportunity? And that usually happens kind of in a one-on-one, like when you're in the car or when you're having breakfast on a Saturday morning. So two kind of real important questions to keep in your parental armamentarium, your quill is is there something important that you'd like to share with me that you haven't had a chance to tell me? Or is there something interesting you want to share with me? Just building that conversation, building that communication connection.
Well, that's great advice. And I think in the last 2 minutes, I was just going to ask you all if there were last things you wanted to mention, advice for parents, or other ways we could think of to help our children or others that are being bullied, what we can do as community members. So let's see, Anne, Dr. Kirby, why don't you go next, and then we'll circle back to Dr. Langenecker. He can have the last word.
I guess in terms of just final messages, something just really important based on my experience is we have growing awareness of autism. We've seen rising rates, but what we understand is that we have better diagnostic, better understanding, and kind of better ways of diagnosing and understanding autism. And so there are more people who have this label that we now know are in need of support and are in need of a culture of kind of inclusion and understanding. And so I hope that people can kind of walk away from this feeling like they would like to kind of make a difference in the terms of autistic mental health and inclusion.
Thank you. Rachel, how about you?
Just really want to echo what everyone said. These can be difficult conversations to have as a child or as a parent. And it's important that we have them, that we create space to have them, and that if concerns are brought up, they're met with empathy and understanding and the chance to work together towards a solution. So looking for ways to say, what are some skills we can build? What are some action plans we can take together? How can we help you feel safe and comfortable and supported going to school? Who are some trusted friends and adults and peers that we can rely on and work with to make sure that you feel safe? Really helps reinforce and make a child feel more loved and secure in their everyday routine. And as always, just remembering that there are 24/7 resources available by downloading SafeUT or calling our crisis line for parents, educators, and students. No one should have to go through these things and certainly shouldn't have to go through them alone. And our team is always here to provide support.
Thanks, Rachel. And Dr. Rodriguez, how about you?
So I was very impressed and touched by what Dr. Kirby said about the creation of a culture of kindness. And I think that that's one of the things that we can work on in our own homes and in the school systems where our children go, is to work on creating that culture. And in a culture of kindness, bullying wouldn't exist. And if there was bullying, we would be kind to both sides to figure out how we could stop the behavior, correct the behavior without hurting the perpetrator, and by preventing the hurt to the victim.
Go ahead, Dr. Langenecker.
I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and to thank all the panelists that joined together to bring some important messaging around these topics. I have a couple of closing thoughts. One related to the conversations that you have with your children. Parenting is busy. Many of us have many children, and sometimes we might forget to follow up. So if there's something that does come up and your child does say something to you, take the time to actually put a reminder in your phone or on the calendar to follow up with them. Because if they've said something to you and shared it with you, and they might just sort of assume that it's important enough on your radar that you'll remember. But we acknowledge that we're busy and things happen. And so find ways to actually augment your memory so you remember to come back and sort of follow up with your child. Like, whatever did happen, with that kid, was it resolved? Is it still ongoing? The second thing related to what Dr. Rodriguez was mentioning is finding additional safe spaces for our children. So if there's a specific context in which they're being bullied, and you're working towards trying to resolve that or to come to some sort of resolution, finding additional spaces, whether it's piano lessons or voice lessons or Dungeons and Dragons club or some other place where they can go and feel safe and comfortable, where the bullying is not occurring. Those are parts of their sort of armamentarium or their skill set for developing resilience. And so finding those places where kids can feel safe and be safe is another way to manage the bullying. And then there's a broader conversation that we at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute are having, continuing to have, and building around what is it about stigma that actually leads to and potentially strengthens some of these messages around bullying. And if we see a human emotion, the expression or experience of human emotion as a weakness, then that becomes sort of a tool for a bully to attack children. If we acknowledge that human emotion is a part of our experience, and we acknowledge that mental health challenges are a part of our experience, and we devote our resources to helping our kids, both those who are bullied and those who are engaged in bullying and getting help, then we can also build this culture of kindness, this culture of care, and we can teach our kids some really good resilience skills along the way. And I always like to close with, resilience is not about never having fallen down. Resilience is about learning the skills to get back up again. And sometimes that takes some help.
That's a great note to end on. So thank you very much. And thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you to all the media. If there are any Spanish language media that wants to ask some questions, we can do that. Dr. Rodriguez, if you don't mind hanging on, if there are a couple that may have some Spanish questions specifically. But again, thank you all. And we really appreciate your questions, your thoughtful questions, and all of our panelists and all of their very thoughtful answers and insights.